Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leathercraft, and this is the Leather Element. If you've got a good question for us or a good idea for a Leather Element, drop it in the comment box below. Now this week, we've got a trick, got a tip coming up. But before we get to that, major milestone for us. We just passed 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. Thank you so very much. From the bottom of my heart and from each and every one of us at Weaver Leathercraft, a big thank you. But to take that a step further, the biggest stress point in my job is when I'm working on a video. Is it going to be helpful? Is it easy to understand? Is it even going to go over? Judging from your comments, they do. And I read every comment, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your gracious comments. Thank you so very much. All right, to celebrate, we're going to have a giveaway. Link below, sign up, because this is cool. One lucky winner is going to win a full side of Weaver Select Natural Veg Tan. You get to pick the weight. And in fact, this is my favorite leather. We're going to use some here very shortly. In addition to that, the winner is going to get one each of 4 sizes of punches. You'll get a round hole, round end, English point, and oblong. Cool thing here, if you're new to leather, pick those standard sizes. If you've got a little experience, might be time to pick that obscure size. We don't use it much, so therefore, we may not be able to justify the purchase of that. Perfect timing. All right, again, link below, sign up. Now, this week, we're going to dye some leather. Now, I know your first thought is, we've dyed some leather before. But we've got 6 ways here to dye leather. One you may not have thought of. And another, it's the only way we can add one of the coolest techniques in leather work I have ever seen. All right, if you're new to leather and you take nothing else away from this video, take this. Dyeing leather does not have to be expensive, messy, or time-consuming. And you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. All right, so let's step over here, add some dye to leather. All right, talking about the mesh. First and foremost, I've got a plastic bag down to protect my work surface. But it's difficult to dye on this. Dye will pool. If I flip my project, it's going to be inconsistent. But also, too, it gets very slippery. That's tough to work with. So let's just drop some cheap packing paper on top. What I'll do, and you'll see, we're not going to make a huge mess. I'm just going to fold this up, put it in my box. Next time I'm ready to dye, pull it out, fast, no mess, okay? Let's start with really the 3 basic ways to add dye. Number 1 is my favorite. I like to dip dye, and there are a bunch of reasons for this. Big point though, the only reason I can do this is I'm using the Pro Dye. This is an oil-based dye stuff, alcohol carrier, but that makes all the difference in the world. So all I'm going to do is dip my project in, let it sit for just a second, pull that out. Let's hit it against the edges, drain off some of that excess. Now with a larger project, what I want to do is get in kind of quick. You notice how fast that dye evaporated or wicked in. I just want to knock out whatever's left kind of quickly. All right, we're going to set that aside. You're going to be surprised how consistent that's going to be. But here's the big point here. First off, speed, obviously. But secondly, every face, edge, back, hole, chisel hole, everything is dyed. And since I'm using my Pro Dye, I'm not going to worry about rub off. That's going to wick in nicely, okay? Second way to go about it, very common if we're using, really I use this for a smaller project. And these are wool daubers and they're great. We sell them, I think they're in 10 packs. So all I have to do is rub this on. Now, one of the keys to getting consistent dye is that I want as much dye on the surface in one pass as I can get. Now, not dripping wet, but I need to get as much coverage in my first pass. That's going to guarantee consistency. But I can always come back over this. There we go. All right. Right over to my edge. Okay, so dauber relatively easy, but that'd be a good bit tedious on a larger project. Speaking of larger projects, if we're going to dip dye, just get a larger bin. I've got 3 or 4, very inexpensive, easy to clean out. All right, so let's set that aside. Now, sponge. If we're going to bump up to a larger panel and we don't want to necessarily go with a dauber, we can always use a sponge. Now, this is our dressing sponge and they're huge. I tend to get one and cut it into several pieces. Very economical. But now what I can do is take my sponge and I can hit the whole project in one pass. Look at that. Let's do one more pass. There we go. All right. And a little bit more. Okay. Let's set that aside. Let's get that excess dye off. Now, funny thing, I bet we're not going to be able to tell the difference between these three pieces. All right, so the next step, we're going to jump over to a paintbrush. Now that sounds odd, but a resist doesn't work like I think it would. So I'm going to clean this up. Let's jump over to our paintbrush. Now, if you're not familiar with a resist, what a resist is going to do literally is resist dye. So if I want a two-tone effect, what I can do is dye my main body in my light brown, paint in the areas where I don't want additional dye, maybe 2, maybe 3 coats, dye again, and then this area is going to resist that dye. Now, 2 points here. First off, resists, they're gorgeous, but they don't work as well as I think they should. I'm going to toss that out there. But secondly, I got to paint that in 1, 2, maybe 3 coats. All right, let's do this. Let's just use a paintbrush to paint in our black. Super easy, one pass, no guesswork. All right, so what I've got here is just a little sample. Now, I've got an edge across here, so I've dropped my swivel in, and then I've beveled that. So I've got a good hard edge there. That makes this super easy to do. So I'm going to take some paint, some dye on my paintbrush, and I'm going to start out on my edge. So therefore, I can get some of that paint out of the brush before I head in and start doing my edge. There we go. Let's run across that edge and come back out. All right, I'm going to do that 2 or 3 more times across this edge. And there we go, coming down our edge. And I can paint my outside edge too, just like I'm painting my top grain here. There we go. All right. Well, that looks good. Look how very clean and very crisp that line is. Is it perfect? No, I can see little imperfections. But you know, if somebody sees that and points that out, they're getting a very inexpensive gift card for Christmas this year. All right. So from here, let's jump over to block dyeing. A little bit out of left field. So I'm going to clean this up. Let's try that. Now with block dyeing, what I've got is just a block of wood, scrap of wood, and I've got 2 cotton rags taped around that. The point here is that we're adding very little dye, so therefore our range marks, our natural blemishes are going to show through. So I'm going to dip my block in my dye, and I've got much less dye in my bin now. Let's run that across, wick out some of that excess dye. There we go. Now with this, let's just run our block all the way across. And maybe one more pass. There we go. And again, let's just set that aside and walk away. Now, I've given that a little bit of time to dry while I've cleaned up, but here's a good point. I can clean my bin with 1 paper towel. Little funnel will help me get my dye back into my jar. So virtually no mess here. Now, I keep replacing this just because it looks better, but for the most part, easy to clean up. In fact, I'm going to set that aside, let that dry, peel the cotton off of that, use it again. All right, so let's take a look at this. Still a little bit wet, but look at that. Really got a rustic, very leather look to it. That'll dry a little bit more, but notice that block dyeing, it's really hit the high points in our leather. Very cool. All right, last one. We're going to jump over to an airbrush. So I'll get set up with that. Let's see how that works. Now, I am by no means an expert with an airbrush, but 2 points here. First off, this is the absolute best way to add dye, paint, and top coat. Uses very little and we have ample control. But also too, what we can do is add a fade, and that to me is gorgeous. Now, I've just got black dye in my well here because we can thin this, but in my opinion, it's already thin because we're going through an airbrush. So therefore, with this, I'm going to drop in black and we're going to create a fade. Well, how cool is that? Can you imagine that technique around a pouch face or even a briefcase? Is that not gorgeous? All right, let's jump back over here because we have some drying time. First off, there's our dip dyed piece. I can even see some of the natural blemishes in the leather. Very cool, but look at my consistency. That's what I want. Right here, that's our dauber. Looks great. Sponge, you know, I can't really tell the difference. And over here, this is our block dyed piece. Looking very rustic, very much like leather. And all that, you know what? No dye on anything but my projects and some inexpensive packing paper. Now technically, I do have 2 spots of dye on me, But after dyeing 6 pieces, 6 different ways transferring dye in and out of bottles, I'll take it, all right? So therefore, yes, dye doesn't have to be messy. It doesn't have to be expensive and time-consuming. In all honesty, we blew through 6 in no time. So I hope this gives you some extra options for adding dye or multiple colors of dye. All kinds of ways we can go with this. So I hope this helps. I hope everything you dye is spot on beautiful. Good luck with your projects.